fresh out the oven. It's Cinema Bums, feeling a little loose. I'm Emmett.
And I'm Wade.
We are Cinema Bums. It's a podcast. You know that. We watch through every single movie in popular film franchises, one each week, to try and track how the storytelling changes over time. Today, we're returning to our miniseries, Can't Stop the Peelin', covering every film series by Jordan Peele to discuss the newly released Candyman. We will fully spoil today's film and also the 1992 Candyman as well. Wade, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. This is our first time ever. Is this our first time ever talking about our new movie?
I think so. This is our first time we've ever been relevant. Thank you, Jordan Peele.
This is definitely our first time we've returned to a series.
Yeah.
I don't think we've built up to a new one coming out in any of the other ones yet. How are you doing, Emmett?
I'm doing great. I'm having a wild and weird weekend and loved watching this movie as part of that. And yeah, I watched it. I finished watching it maybe an hour ago. So it is fresh. It is fresh.
You're coming in hot.
Yeah, I'm coming in hot off of this one, dude.
2 nights ago, I watched the original, and then last night I watched the new one.
Okay.
So I watched them back-to-back evenings. And also, I would say Laura and I talked for about like an hour after each one of these.
Wow, yeah.
There's like a lot to unpack with both of them.
Yeah.
I think they're both like good and weird and messy movies in completely different ways.
Yeah. We want to care to unpack that? Care to disembowel that concept a little further?
I just think, and I'm sure we'll try to get through all of this, but they both have like very complicated mythologies that they set up. And the two mythologies are like entirely different from each other for the most part.
Yeah.
In the two different movies. So there is like a lot there in both of them.
That's true. Ooh. I don't know. I think, but that difference is, I think, kind of maybe what the second movie is about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just a random, we decided to change the backstory because.
There was a moment in the second one where I was like, is this a movie about storytelling?
Right?
Like, is that what it's supposed to be?
Yeah. And well, because the original has that journalism angle to it, or like kind of grad student investigative thing going on. And this has the artist eye in. I feel like the storytelling metaphor might be clearer in the first one.
Yeah.
Although I think like the experiential side might make more sense in this one. Like how the cycle reiterates might make more sense in this one.
I think in general things are slightly more successful in the first one, but I think they're very similar.
Yeah. And
they both have like kind of incoherent last 20 minutes. But which are both exciting in both of them.
Dude, the end of the original Candyman is straight up just like they were like, okay, we just want to have a metal ending. They're like, we don't care.
Yeah.
Like, we've just gotten into it. Like, you have the whole like exorcism in the fire, and she like saves the baby, and she gets to die peacefully. And you're like, and then it just has like the slasher twist ending of like her coming back, which is like cool, and it is metal. And like, I think it makes it a better movie, but it makes it as a story and as a metaphor less coherent.
Yes. And like an earlier twist about her involvement in it, I would say also makes the first one less coherent. How about we talk through the first one a little bit? Straight up.
I'm just going to turn this into a podcast about both of these movies.
Okay.
Because I loved the first one so much, and I love I love both of them, and I think like the way they're working is good. So like first one, flop or bop?
I would go bop for the first one.
Yeah, I would also go bop. You? Yeah, bop. Okay, cool. Let's try and explicate it. Wade, you're on the spot for this one.
Let me drop some facts on you about this first one.
Okay.
Because I'm sure some of our listeners will be like me 3 days ago and have never seen either of these movies. Although, I remember being told this as a kid. I don't know if you ever heard about this movie, but I have a distinct memory. I was in Virginia, so I think it would have been second grade, of like 2 kids walking out of the bathroom and telling me, like, if you turn the lights off and look in the mirror and say Candyman 5 times, he'll appear in the mirror. And that was just like a thing in my head for a long time.
So I heard a similar urban legend, but it was Bloody Mary is like the one that I heard. But it's like the same urban legend of like a person who appears and kills you if you say their name in the mirror. And I was always just like, well, obviously that's not real, but why the hell would you test it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not worth running that experiment, as one of the characters fortuitously says in this film. Nope. Which is a perfect time to say 47 weeks until Jordan Peele's Nope.
Do you think? I was surprised they didn't cut to a trailer for Nope.
Yeah, right in the middle of the movie. But when they screen it on Disney Plus, that's exactly where the trailer is going to go.
Yeah, it's going to be 5 minutes long when they screen it on Disney Plus. I had also, as a kid, heard about the razor blades and the candy thing.
Yes. Yeah.
This was definitely a thing where like my parents every Halloween had to like open all of them or like feel all of them before I could eat them. This is apparently that's just like an urban legend. Like there have never been any recorded instances of that happening ever.
Yeah, it's complete BS.
When I was a kid, I definitely thought it was a scheme by my parents that they had to like check them for poison, like eat which one they wanted.
Yeah, I think that's really what it was. I think you're uncovering a great truth here.
But that is something that I feel like everyone, at least in our generation, like knows about and dealt with. And that was something that I guess just like all over the world, people were like, yeah, my friend's friend found razor blades in their candy, so now we all got to look for them.
And not just that, but there's like other tropes going on there as well. As like the hook-handed guy who kills people on Lover's Lane is like an even older, that's like a 1950s like style story of like, oh, like these people were making out in the car and they got killed by the hook-handed man. And so there's like that kind of older urban mythology as well. Yeah, and it's by Clive Barker. He's kind of like a fantasy horror writer that I was really into in like high school. And so I've never read this story, but like I was aware that he was involved with it and it looked creepy and I was like, oh, he's into some weird stuff, so like maybe I don't want to check it out.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue here into talking about the first one. Clive Barker had this series called Books of Blood, which were like collections of short stories. I think those were his breakout, and then he did a lot of other stuff. I think it's in volume 5. There's a short story called The Forbidden, which is about a grad student in Britain, in London, who is doing like a thesis on urban legends and hears about the Candyman. It's very similar to the plot of the first film, but it is set in London, and it's like a metaphor for the class system in London, rather than being specifically about race. Clive Barker also famous for writing the novels and writing and directing the first movie of Hellraiser.
Oh, yeah.
I think you watched.
I did watch that. Okay, so it gave me major Hellraiser vibes when I was watching it, and that makes sense. I think Hellraiser is less coherent, and that's probably because he wrote and directed it. And it was like more of his just like... Hellraiser is like a nightmare vision, but I have no idea what the plot of it is or what the hell anybody's doing in it. Like that one is basically about this dream cycle. Yeah,
there is a dreamy element to this first one in particular.
And I think like even comes through like the way it's shot feels like the colors are very vibrant and like almost too bright.
So he writes the story. Then the British director Bernard Rose from London, he's a white guy, which is important to note because like everything in this movie he makes is very distinct to race. He sets out to adapt this story, The Forbidden, and he is the one who changes it from being set in London and about the class system to being set in Chicago, set in the actual historic Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago. He writes and directs this first movie, which was released October 16th, 1992. Really notably, it has music by Philip Glass.
Yes.
Which I think contributes to that dreamlike thing we're talking about in this first one. Yeah, it's like mostly piano music. It's very beautiful. I read that Philip had conflicting feelings about it because he said that when he signed on, he thought it was going to be more of like a London thriller, basically. And then he was a little let down that he was doing the music for what he thought was a slasher. But then I read later in life, he was like, actually, that's the movie that I get the most residual checks from of anything I've ever made.
Yeah.
So I like that.
That's awesome. Even the most down-ass artsy dudes, every once in a while, you're Philip Glass, you gotta take a paycheck. You do a Candyman movie.
So this first one is starring Virginia Madsen as Helen Lyle, who is the protagonist.
Who is incredible in this movie.
Yeah. She's great. You've got Tony Todd playing the Candyman. Should we walk through the bones of this plot, Emmett?
So she's a grad student
at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
Her husband is a professor there.
Yes.
And there's some tension.
Yes. It seems from the beginning that he is sleeping with a student, which is eventually confirmed. A student played by, as I found out, a porn star at the time.
That's incredible. What a move.
Yeah.
And it's her and...
So she's doing seemingly a joint thesis.
Yes.
With her friend Bernadette.
Yes.
Who is a black woman played by Cassie Lemons. And they are doing this thesis on urban folklore in Chicago.
And so she finds out this creepy stuff about this attack that just happened at Cabrini Green. And she goes to investigate it. As she starts to unwind this, she hears the story of the Candyman, who, as we said, if you say his name 5 times, he appears behind you and kills you if you say it in a mirror. But eventually she invokes Candyman by saying his name in the mirror. And she starts to get creeped out, chased around by this big dude with a hook for a hand. She gets clubbed in the head by a guy with a meat hook at one point while she's investigating it. But he's just a real person, nothing supernatural. But he just didn't like her snooping around Cabrini Green. She's still being chased even after that guy's been locked up. And she's hearing voices, but she's not sure if it's because, hey, she just suffered a massive head trauma. Like when that guy hit her with the meat cleaver. At a certain point, and this part, I love this, this part. She's in the parking garage. She sees the guy. He comes up to her. She passes out. She wakes up. It's a completely different scene. There's blood everywhere. She has a knife. She has no idea how she got there or has it. There's a dog with a severed head. There's a woman running around also covered in blood and screaming. It's a woman that she had previously met, and she's in this woman's apartment in Cabrini Green, as she eventually finds out. The woman attacks her, and she stabs her or cuts her shoulder or something. And the cops show up and take her into custody because they think that she killed the dog, right?
Yes. So let me run it back a little bit on this one. This whole film is set in Chicago, which is part of the reason I loved it. I think it's a pretty good Chicago movie. I used to live in Chicago. It's my favorite city in the world. But it is notoriously one of the most segregated cities in the world. And that is part of this movie is the racial tension between the academia world, which is what this movie is about, and members of the poorer community in the area. So she starts she's looking up urban folklore. She hears about this recent murder, which is important to her. This was a little confusing to me, but relevant to her because her fancy apartment was the same building structure as the Cabrini Green project housing.
It had also been a project, so knew that she could get into the apartment the woman had been killed in if she could get into the apartment next to it or something.
Yes, because the structure of her bathroom is that her mirror comes out of the wall and you can see straight into the apartment next to it. And since they're the same layout, she knows she can do this at Cabrini Green. So she goes on the scene at Cabrini Green. Her and Bernadette both go. And she goes into the apartment where this woman was murdered. She knows about this, by the way, because some janitors, 2 black janitors at the college tell her about it.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so when she goes into it, she goes into the apartment where the kill was. And it has been sort of defaced and covered in graffiti. There's this recurring phrase, sweets to the sweets. She finds a bunch of candy that has one of them has a razor blade in it.
That's the only reference to that.
You never hear why that's there. You never hear why he's called Candyman. That she just finds that in that one scene. And so then when she gets out of there, she is greeted by the next door neighbor, Anna Marie McCoy is the name of the next door neighbor. She's raising a little baby boy, and she talks to them. She goes on record and talks to them a little bit about what happened. And then shortly thereafter, Helen and her husband are having dinner with the dean or some other professor One of the dudes explains that he had written his thesis on Candyman.
Oh, okay. Right. Because there's that whole element too where she's feeling like she's being shut out too.
Yeah, there's also this other academic, like very gendered academic world thing too, which is that like this other guy already wrote about Candyman, but he wouldn't go to Cabrini Green, and that's like what her and Bernadette are willing to do that no one else would. Like actually go to the projects. But he explains the story of Candyman.
Oh, the origin story, which is that he had been, the original guy was this son of a freed slave in the 1880s who was lynched at Caprini Green for getting a white woman pregnant. Had him stung to death by bees is the eventual. They sawed off his arm and had him stung to death by bees. Is how they killed him. So there's this whole bee motif, which is also just like never explained other than that it's creepy. It's like rule of cool. It is just there, baby.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell from how we're talking about this. It's a little scrambled, but like this movie has so many ideas.
It has so much going on, and it is so, and like, it works better than we're making it sound like it works. I feel like.
Absolutely. It is like one of the most original movies I have ever seen.
Totally edge of my seat the entire time. I was like, what the hell could happen next?
It isn't a plot that really subscribes to genre conventions or plots you've seen in other movies. It feels more like a short story in that way, that it's like paced weird and takes so many turns and has so many things it's playing with. But yes, one of them is that the backstory is Candyman, as Emmett said, was like this well-respected painter who was the son of a slave and was hired by like a wealthy white family to paint their daughter, fell in love with their daughter, got her pregnant, and for that was killed. Was given a hook hand and then killed by bees. And that is important because there is kind of like a graffiti element too, which relates back to the painting.
Oh, yeah. Every symbol in this movie like ties back to some other symbol in this movie, but they never all like quite add up.
At a certain point, the thrust of this movie becomes that Helen has summoned the Candyman, who appears to her in physical form, but no one else can see him when he appears. The Candyman has then kidnapped Anthony McCoy, the baby of Anna Marie McCoy, the nice lady at Cabrini Green who is working with them. The Candyman is holding the baby hostage, and he's saying to Helen, "Be my victim, and I'll let the baby go." And he is frequently appearing to her in scenes where, if she refuses to be his victim, he then kills everyone around her and like leaves her with a murder weapon to sort of frame her for having killed those people.
And it is like, that works. Like, it is a truly horrifying, like, Kafka-esque nightmare. Like, especially the first time it happens, even when it's just the dog, but you think, like, maybe she's killed the baby, too, and you don't know, and they're like, we haven't looked in the crib yet, we don't know what's going on. It's, like, so horrifying. That is effective.
I really thought that was a dream sequence for, like, the first 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so weird, and
this
out of
can't
nowhere,
be real.
It can't be real. And then it was, and I was like, wow, that's just what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And that continues to happen. And that is a great fear in the first one, which is entirely absent from the second one. But this like very unique fear of being like framed by the Candyman, basically. That these horrible things are happening and you're the only one who knows about them. And then you are left looking responsible for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the other thing going on that we've got to talk about is that the Candyman is really hot.
Oh, yeah.
And he's kind of like framed as like a romantic hero. There is like this seduction element between him and Helen.
Like kind of like a sexual vampire sort of thing.
Yeah. He speaks sort of in almost like Victorian era sonnets.
Yeah, yeah. And like when he talks, it's not just like the actor speaking. There's like all of this weird like voice effect stuff going on. So it sounds like he's all around and it's like very, it's creepy but sensual.
And he also has an incredible voice. Tony Todd, who's playing him, has like the most amazing voice. So eventually, it is basically that everyone close to her gets killed by the Candyman. People keep like in close proximity, keep getting killed except for her husband. Because the world also thinks that she has done it. Since she has been framed, the world thinks that, like, she killed this woman's dog and has stolen the kid and won't tell anyone where it is.
And now that she's gone on a killing spree as well.
So she goes back to Cabrini Green. She goes into the Candyman's, like, lair, which is upstairs of the apartment that she had seen before. And she's like, I'll be your victim if you let the kid go. This is where it starts to get, like, kind of weird. This is also sort of like a seduction scene between them. Then there's, like, the iconic moment from this movie, which is actually very short in execution. But, like, the famous thing is that, like, he has a ton of bees on him and, like, bees in his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all real, too. That's, like, practical effects.
Oh, that's horrifying.
Actually has, like, 30 bees inside of his mouth, and they both have bees swarming all around them.
That's disgusting, but good to know, I guess.
Apparently, he negotiated a contract where he got, like, $1,000 per sting.
Damn.
Then he says, "It was always you, Helen." And he shows her graffiti in the room that says, "It was always you, Helen." And then you see a painting of what looks like Helen in Victorian... I mean, this is supposed to be in America, so Victorian is inaccurate.
But in, Reconstruction era, post-Civil War.
The implication seems to be, at least seemed to me, that this was the painting that he made of the woman he was in love with, who he got pregnant.
Yeah.
And make of this what you will, the woman looks just like Helen. That's not going to be answered. But that's the thing.
Yeah.
Then he takes the baby and he says, now it's time for another miracle, which is another strange thing. But the climax of this movie is that he has put the baby on top of this, like, burning bonfire pyre, which is another real practical effect thing that is crazy. That is, like, literally in real life was like 70 feet high and 30 feet wide.
Damn.
Just like all this junk that you see earlier in the movie. And they said, like, that's for the bonfire.
And you're like, oh, that's going to be bad later.
So they put the baby on top of it. Helen is at the bottom of it, and she's got to get up, get the baby, and get out of it as the residents of Cabrini Green have set it on fire.
Because they think the Candyman is in there, and they're going to rid themselves of the Candyman.
Exactly. And it ends with Helen doing it just in time. She catches on fire. All of her hair burns off. So she looks really scary, and she's actively on fire. But she gets out of it, and she gives the baby back to Anna Marie, who's there in the crowd. And the Candyman is, like, screaming, doesn't want her to do this, burns in the pyre, seemingly dies. The original Candyman seemingly is burned to death because, like, his bee insides were exposed or whatever. And Helen also dies from the burn wounds.
And from generally having had a rough couple of days.
Yes, that's true. Then we cut to her funeral, and it's like a very private funeral. It's like just her husband, the student who we found out the husband is actually sleeping with, and like the professor guy from earlier. And then like a huge parade of the Cabrini Green residents come, led by Anna Marie, who throws a hook onto her grave. That's not explained in the first movie. Then we cut to the husband, seemingly like now racked with guilt over everything that happens, who looks in the mirror, says Helen's name 5 times. And then Helen appears to him as the new Candyman with like all of her hair burned off, looking like a monster with a hook for his hand, kills him and frames the student for his death. That's the end of the movie.
And
the first Candyman is dead.
So
Helen
metal.
is the new Candyman. Everyone is dead. It's very metal.
Okay, so that's just wild. I want to take a little side path here to go down a deep rabbit hole, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in 1995, there was a sequel to the first Candyman called Candyman Farewell to Flesh.
Right.
Directed by Bill Condon.
Yes, the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 1 and 2 fame.
It also starred Tony Todd, but I don't think it starred any of the rest of them. So apparently there's more Candyman stuff, and then also a Candyman 3, Day of the Dead, 1999. Still starring Tony Todd, so I'm glad he got like some good work out of this, at least. Mm-hmm. Those are, irrelevant to this sequel? Are they ignored by the sequel that we're actually talking about today?
Yes, those 2 movies were poorly received. and they were both ignored and considered not canon by Candyman 2021, which is a direct sequel to Candyman 1992.
Now, where do the Candyman stand?
That is a good question. I don't really know, but I don't think that there are many fans of those two movies.
Okay, fair enough.
I think Candyman is like, the 1992 one is like original enough, notable for having this really provocative race element in it, and has like this urban legend angle to it that it has sort of like continued in popularity, even though it's not like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, like a slasher one that is on the top of everyone's list to revisit, you know?
Sure.
But I don't think the other two are really discussed much. So how did you feel about this first one?
I texted you like right afterwards and was like, I think this perfectly fit into our run of Denis Villeneuve movies. Like it felt of a piece with everything that we'd been watching in some strange way. I don't know if this is like what the literal story was, but the clear metaphor to me was that she had been like killing people the whole time. She had been possessed by this story in such a way that she was enacting all of these acts of murder, and she really was just crazy. And then at the very end, you know, when she saves the baby, it was like at the very beginning, she like talks about how she always wanted a baby. And then at the very end, like this baby's going to die. Right. At like the very last moment, like something in her like instinctually wants to save the baby. She like goes and saves the baby and like dies doing it, and is like kind of forgiven by the community for the violence enacted upon it because she like managed to save this kid. And I thought it was an interesting like look at like, it's not even like a white savior complex, although it like becomes that like later on in the movie. But at first it's just like to some degree, just like being interested in urban poverty porn basically. And like using that as your master's thesis. Like the thing that's going to get you published and like get your name on the map is like going and exploiting somebody else's real and legitimate pain. Like that seems complicated.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'm not going to say straight up it's a bad thing, because that is how people do research, and like you can't write about, I don't know, like, yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff is like really complicated and tangled up and filtered through the lens of academia, you know?
Yeah.
Which is like kind of what is really interesting and unique and like complicating about it. Because like Helen is very aware of sort of all of like the racial stereotypes and taboos and attitudes of everyone around her, and is like trying to engage with those, you know, but is also engaging from like academia bent, like,
well, and she's claiming neutrality for herself. A neutrality that no living person can actually possess, you know?
Yeah.
In that like neutrality of academia, when it's really like she is a part of the cycle. She's not just like, you can't just be an observer. Like observation changes.
And she is also sort of taking advantage of that, because like she is going to this poor area of Chicago that most white people are like terrified of.
Yeah.
You know, still to this day, like Fox News and everyone like portrays Southside Chicago as like a war zone.
Yeah.
Like, get off the train, do not go anywhere near Southside Chicago. And Helen is like willing to go there and just like engage with everyone there as a real human being. But when she gets there, everyone thinks she's a cop, and they're scared of her, and she like uses that to her advantage to be able to like get in and out unharmed. So she is also sort of like taking advantage of this system in some ways.
Yeah.
But then she is also like constantly mentioning it and talking about it. Like she gets attacked by some gang guys. One of them is holding a hook, as we mentioned. The police come and rescue her and arrest the guys. And like when she gets out of prison, like what she has to say about that is like, it's so messed up that this black woman was killed, called the police, they wouldn't come. And like the second a white lady gets hurt, there's like 30 cops there to bring everyone in, you know?
Yeah. Because then they think he's the one that killed the original lady too.
Right.
Because he hit her with a hook and she was killed with a hook. They assumed that he was also responsible for her death.
It seems to me that the writer-director Bernard Rose's take on all of this stuff, even though there are like a lot of really provocative things in it, I feel like his take ultimately is summed up by the speech that Anna Marie gives early in the movie, which is basically like, everyone's scared to come here, and people think that every black person here is harboring drugs or doing unsafe things, and we're constantly portrayed this way, but we're just normal people like everyone else, raising our kids, living a normal life. That is like the speech that Anna Marie gives. It seems from like most of the stuff I've read from Bernard Rose that was really about the full extent of his vision for this. Was sort of being like, it's so ridiculous that everyone is saying, don't go to Southside Chicago. Those are just normal people. Like, I'm going to make a movie that is sort of about that.
Like, her funeral is such a miserable affair. And then all of those people show up and are like, they're like paying respects to her. I don't know how they feel about her exactly, but they're like there, which is interesting too.
Yeah. And there isn't really any sort of racial element to the Candyman in this movie. Like, in terms of who he's killing or like his personal motivation.
Oh, yeah.
He's really just trying to get Helen to be his victim.
Yeah.
He's basically like asking for her consent and killing people until he gets it.
It's either just because she happened to be the one to say his name, or because she was always the one who was reincarnated. Like, he's like, she's his reincarnated bride from the way back times, which is also...
What did you make of this? It was always you, Helen.
Absolutely nothing. I was like, I'm just ignoring that. I was like, I like this movie. That's not a thing that's happening. I said no to that one. I was like, cool, it was Helen all along. I'm going to take that as a confirmation of my theory and ignore the part where maybe she's a reincarnation, because that's too weird for me to handle. Clive Barker is about that reincarnation, though, so... But
it seems like almost sort of a sad ending for Candyman if, like, he's finally found his love again.
Yeah, that's
this
true.
Whole movie, he's asking for her to be with him. She eventually says yes, but then in the end, he dies and doesn't get to be with her.
Damn.
And she, like, takes his place as this monster.
Damn.
A couple of other things I want to mention. We haven't called this out, but there's an incredible child performance in this film.
Oh my God, yes.
One of the best I've seen in any movie, by this little kid who lives in Cabrini Green. The character's name is Jake. And I will say, for me, a huge missed opportunity not bringing back this character in the sequel, because he is like a huge standout of the original. Just as like a kid who was cool with Helen, like an 8-year-old kid.
Who saved her life.
And he plays like comedy and fear and sorrow all throughout this movie and does it all really well.
Yeah.
The rules of summoning Candyman are also weird and inconsistent even in this first movie. Because the first kill we see, the very first kill we see, which is just like this one-off, like almost classic slasher stuff. Like a high school couple who are home alone, and it's a scene where they're looking in the mirror. The boyfriend says it 4 times and then leaves. And then the girlfriend says it once and then he appears. So then I was like, okay, so it's not per person, it's per mirror. It's like, it doesn't matter who says it. If it's said 5 times looking in a mirror by anyone, then he appears. But then the next time we see it, 2 characters say it simultaneously 4 times. Meaning it's been said 8 times in the mirror. And then one of them leaves, and then the other one says it once, and then he appears.
Okay.
And it is similarly confusing throughout. It's also like not as simple as he shows up and he kills you. Or maybe it is supposed to be that simple until Helen, and it's not that simple with Helen because she's his reincarnated lover. Which
is like a theory that I buy, but that you are making up on the spot. Like, that movie did not tell you that. The movie did not lay that out for you.
No, but I'm saying it's not a thing where, like, you say it and he kills you.
No, that's true.
Most of the killing he does is in, like, relation to Helen, and it's of, like, people who are either in her way or that she loves.
Yeah, and most of those people don't say his name?
Not at all. Some of those people can see him, like Bernadette can see him, but it is revealed in, like, a pretty cool but small manner in the first film, where he, like, appears to her in her hospital room. And then later she sees, like, security footage of that happening.
Oh, and he doesn't show up.
And he doesn't show up on the security footage. So that is, like, something, but it's not a thing in this first film, which is going to be like a huge thing in the second film that you can only see him in a mirror. That's not in the first.
Oh, yeah, that's not a thing. Probably because they didn't have the technology.
Yeah,
Straight up. Like, they may have done it if they could have.
Everything is like a practical effect in the first movie.
That is also something that makes it a lot scarier.
I will say, personally, I was not scared in any capacity by the first movie. It just like wasn't scary to me, but it was very interesting. And I wasn't disappointed that it wasn't scary.
It wasn't that it was just deeply unnerving is what
Yeah.
like kind of what I took from it. And I was just like continued to think about it. I was like, oh, what a horrible thing. What a horrible thing to have happen to you. That would really ruin your whole week.
It was almost closer to me for like a sci-fi movie where there are like so many complications and so many unique things it's trying to say.
Yeah.
And most of the movie was keeping up with those. Would you want to give an MVP for the first one?
MVP is, it's hard. Anna Marie.
Mm-hmm.
She like has to play a wide range in like very brief bursts, but like sell it every time and kind of be like in some ways the emotional center of the film.
Yeah.
And I think she does a terrific job.
She would be my first pick for MVP too. She is really incredible and sells everything. But my second pick would be Jake, just as you mentioned. A great child performance. And, Bernadette is good too. And also the husband is like a great creepazoid.
He is a great creepazoid. Yeah, you're right.
A great like 90s sad sack in like professor sweaters and like extremely balding and sort of slinking around.
Dude, it's so satisfying when she kills him at the end.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean about this like rule of cool. They were like, no, we don't care. We want to watch her gut this guy like a fish.
Well, the scene that's like also so satisfying is when she like comes back to the house to try and connect with him after like escaping and then finds out that he is living. That's another creepy thing in this movie is that it appears that things transpire over about a day, and then she is told that she has been like asleep for a month in this hospital while being drugged.
Yeah.
And like the world has continued around her and she hasn't even realized it.
Damn, that's
like,
scary.
That's
too.
Another creepy thing. But I don't know. It just is interesting. Like it is a movie that wants to dive into race relations and wants to talk about Chicago and has a lot to say, seemingly a pro-black message, but coming from a white creator and a white protagonist and like viewed through that lens very much.
Yeah. Putting that aside for now,
yes.
Shall we turn to Candyman 2021, directed by Nia DaCosta and written by her, Jordan Peele, and one other person whose name escapes me.
Yeah, so the first draft of this new one was co-written by Jordan Peele, which is obviously why we're talking about this. All the movies written by Jordan Peele. Co-written by Jordan Peele and Win Rosenfeld. Now, this is Win Rosenfeld's first film credit on a screenplay, but he is the president of Monkey Paw Productions, Jordan Peele's production company.
Wow.
So he has worked closely with Jordan Peele for like forever. That first draft was written by them. Then when Nia DaCosta came on board to direct, she wrote a second draft, which was the shooting script.
I would like to say right here that I would really like to check out and plan to soon her first feature that she also wrote and directed called Little Woods, starring Tessa Thompson and Lily James. So should be exciting. It's a crime thriller.
Yes.
I plan to check that out sometime soon. I wanted to before we recorded this and could not find time.
Yeah, that's her first film, which came out in 2019, which she wrote and directed. Then this one, which she has rewritten and directed. She is now currently filming The Marvels, which is an MCU movie. It's Captain Marvel 2, but sort of like a team-up movie about Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau from WandaVision, who is played by Tiana Paris, who is in this movie, and Miss Marvel, who's going to have her own Disney Plus show before this movie comes out. But she is currently filming that, which makes her not just the first female black director in the MCU, but the youngest director of an MCU movie ever at 31 years old.
Wow. Good for her. That's
Isn't
so
that
cool.
awesome?
That is so awesome. Well, Wade.
And this new one was released August 27th, 2021. Just came out this weekend. It's an hour and 31 minutes. A music by Robert A. Lowe, The music in this is also, I would say, very distinctive and unique and cool, although very different from the Philip Glass stuff. And obviously we don't have the full numbers yet, but it had a really successful first weekend.
Sweet.
A budget of 25 mil, and I just read as we started to record this that it made 27 mil in its first weekend.
Wow. Okay.
And I can say I saw this Saturday night, and the screening was sold out, so people definitely seem into it. And I think they spent a lot on marketing in this one too.
I saw it this afternoon in an empty house, but that's what you can expect at an afternoon in August on the beach. So.
Where should we start?
Where
Do you want to walk through the plot of this one?
Okay, yes. Okay, so walking through the plot of this one.
So this movie's a legacy sequel. It's ignoring the two. It's bringing back actors from the original. It takes place in 2019, so 27 years after the original. This seems to me to be a case where watching the first movie is kind of a spoiler for the second movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that your experience of this movie is very different depending on if you've seen the first movie or not going into it.
I am certain that is true. But on the other hand, I feel like this movie would also be a spoiler for the first one.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really do it that way either. So, okay.
This movie starts with the production logos being flipped backwards, as though you're watching them through a mirror, which is the coolest thing in the world.
So cool.
Yeah.
So cool and so weird that for like the first 30 seconds, I was convinced that like the reel was flipped, that it was like somehow going backwards.
And the first one also starts with shots looking down at Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle of the day. And this one starts with, in the middle of the night, shots from the ground of the Chicago, like looking up and sort of being reflected as though the buildings are like floating in midair.
That is so ghostly. It's so cool. Basically, there's this guy. He's an artist. He's a black artist in Chicago being put up by these snooty art people. And a lot of his work seems to have been dealing with like racial trauma in some way. And then he hears the story of the Candyman and is like, this is a perfect outlet for what I want to say. But the story that he hears about the Candyman is very different from the story that we hear in the first one. So we should get into that for a second.
Yes.
Because the story that he hears from this old guy who is like around Cabrini Green is that in the 70s, there was this guy with a hook for a hand, just like a normal guy, but with a hook for a hand, who used to give out candy to the kids, like out in the middle of the street.
Some kids found razor blades in their candy.
And thought he did it, but it wasn't necessarily the candy that he had given out. A little white girl did. Specifically, it was like a white girl that found the razor blade in her candy. And then the cops went down and were like looking for him. And so he hid. He had hidden in like this hole in the wall of the project. And this young kid saw him and screamed because he like got scared and thought, but the guy was just like trying to be friendly and give him some candy. And then the cops came and shot and killed the guy and like piled on him. And that then there was like a curse from that guy and that his ghost kept coming back and killing people.
From then on, people would say, if you say Candyman in the mirror 5 times, he will appear and he will kill you.
Yeah.
That is the specific way that it's told in this movie.
And so this guy, whose name is Anthony, but we don't get that for a ways into the movie, I feel like.
No,
like it's teased.
No, it's said early. It's about 10 or 15 minutes in the scene with the art critic.
Oh.
Or, no. Sorry. In the scene with, I don't even know what his relationship is, but he's one of the curators for the show. This like very hipster white guy. He says Anthony McCoy.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't even like hear it when it happened then. I don't know. In some ways, I had like forgotten that was even somebody we should be remembering. And I was so in on the plot that was already happening, I forgot that he was the baby, but he's the baby that gets pulled out of the fire in the first.
And if you have seen the first one, that is not hidden from you. If you haven't, then you would not know that.
Yes, until much, much later in the movie.
By the way, I read that, I did not catch this myself, but I read that his name is only said 5 times in this movie. And the 5th time is when he undergoes the transformation at the end of this movie.
Whoa, that's cool.
So Anthony, as we've said, is this artist. He's living with his girlfriend, Brianna, played by Tiana Paris, who is an art curator. And he gets inspired by the tale that, I don't know the character's name, but Coleman Domingo is the actor, who's really good. And he's on like a tear recently from Ma Rainey. I saw him in Zola too, which he was great in.
He is so good in this movie, and he is on a slow burn.
Yeah.
Like, he is like doing something else in this movie, but you don't know until like far in. And by the time it starts to really come out, you're like, oh, it's been so obvious the whole time. But
it totally worked on me too.
It worked.
When that is revealed, I was like, well, I guess I should have known that they cast Coleman Domingo as this guy. He was probably going to be important, but like, it totally worked on me.
Yeah.
But he is the grown-up version of that kid who saw the Candyman murder in the 70s, which happened in a laundromat. Now he runs a laundromat in like the basically now abandoned like project section of Cabrini Green that's still left. Anthony lives in like a high-rise, gentrified, fancy Chicago apartment that is built on Cabrini Green ground.
Yeah.
And he gets inspired by this story. He makes visual art pieces about this. So this new one is like very much, I would say, a visual art movie.
Yeah.
In the way the first movie is an academia movie.
Yeah.
One thread is that Anthony gets stung by a bee while he's looking around Cabrini Green, which starts like, the bee sting starts like spreading all across his hand. And eventually his arm.
Truly gross. And at like a certain point, like when it gets to be about the size of a quarter, I was like, why the hell hasn't he gotten that checked out yet? And by the time it's like his whole arm is rotting away, he's like, oh, maybe I should go to the hospital for this.
So he creates this art exhibit and people start dying.
He's made an art exhibit that's a mirror that says, say Candyman's name. But also you open it up and you can look through and there's like visual art, which is also a subtle reference to the original movie, but is never talked about anywhere else. That's like what it would look like. The bathroom mirror would open up and you could like see into the room and there'd be all this creepy graffiti and stuff. So there is that same visual art element, like tying back in from the first one.
Yeah, I don't know. The structure of this one, like there is less of a ramp up to the ending than there is in the first one. It is more sort of that like this version of Candyman is going around and killing people.
And all of them are related to Anthony this time.
But Anthony isn't being framed in the way that Helen is in the first.
Even though he's being at least as suspicious as Helen is in the first one. If not more so.
But we see no instances of like him being considered a suspect or people interviewing him or anything like that.
Which is, I think, very strange because like I think that's like such a specific fear of the first one.
Yeah, this movie is like totally different in the scares it's going for than the first one.
Yeah.
And a lot of the scares that it would make sense from the first one are not here. But it has new ideas. The thing that works the most for me is the body horror. This idea that like his arm is being taken over.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's really scary. This one is also definitely much bloodier than the first one. There's also this thing with his girlfriend, Brianna, where because of like her connection to these murders, she is sort of being like elevated. Her voice is being elevated in the art world.
But that never adds up either.
And people are respecting her more. And we also see that her father was an artist who killed himself, which she witnessed as a child.
Yeah. Does it feel like this movie is missing 30 minutes?
Yeah, it feels like it's missing at least 20 minutes.
I love the way this movie ends, but it also feels like it's missing some significant amount of either wrap up or just fleshed out stuff for the third act before that final like showdown.
Let me hone in on a specific element a little bit here. We hear the stories told throughout the movie, and one of them is the story of the first movie, which is told through shadow puppets. The story of the first movie is told in a way that we know did not happen. They say that, like, Helen was this lady who went crazy. The story is not connected to Candyman at all. But she went crazy. She killed a lot of people. She started a bonfire and was trying to kill this baby, Anthony McCoy, who she had kidnapped. And then basically, like, they stopped her, they got the baby back, and then she burned herself alive. And having watched the first movie, we know that that's not true, or at least not what was shown in the first movie.
Right.
And we know that he's the baby, but he doesn't know that. And he keeps getting calls from his mom and he won't answer. So having seen the first movie, this is sort of like the legacy thing they're teasing out, that you're like, okay, Anna Marie is going to be in this. She's going to like
drop some knowledge on him, like tell him what the deal is, be like, confront your past.
So eventually at the end, maybe 110 into this 130 movie, he goes and sees his mom, Anna Marie, played by the same actress, Vanessa Williams.
Who's excellent in this 5-minute scene that she has to.
Okay, I'll talk about her later, but she's incredible. And she looks unbelievable. She looks like just like the first movie. I mean, unbelievable. I saw a lot of people who had not seen the first movie who were like, why did they cast an actress younger than him to play his mom? And she's 58. She looks exactly the same as the first movie. His mom reveals to him that he was the baby. She hid it from him his whole life because she didn't want him to be like scarred by that knowledge. And she reveals, this is an interesting element that maybe they don't do a ton with, but that everyone from that Cabrini Green circle agreed that they would never talk about Candyman again.
Oh.
And that is sort of the explanation given of the end of the first movie, which is that like the mom knew the truth about Helen. She knew that she had been possessed by the Candyman. It wasn't really her actions.
Right.
And like they all agreed to like let the legend die, and they buried the hook with Helen, and they were like, that's the end of it. It'll never hurt anyone again.
They also don't know that she rose from the grave and killed her husband.
They don't know. But the idea that this movie has is that there are candy men. This is the idea that Coleman Domingo is kind of talking about, is that like there are different versions of the legend, but the legend that this movie is all about is this specific guy, Sherman, who is the guy from the 70s who was killed. And he became the Candyman. And every time we see the Candyman kill any of these people, it's always that guy. It's not Tony Todd. It's not the character from the original. It's this new Candyman, who's like an older guy. And so the idea is that Coleman Domingo has... Okay, help me through this. Coleman Domingo says Candyman isn't real. It's like something that we tell ourselves to like deal with the trauma of what's happening. So like he as a child saw 50 police officers murder an innocent man.
Yeah.
And everyone said it was Candyman. And he is saying that's like how they deal with it. Then... At the end of the movie, it is revealed that Coleman Domingo saw his sister, after this as a child, summon Candyman, and Candyman killed his sister.
Yeah.
And it was that same guy. So he saw Sherman then as the Candyman.
Yes.
Presumably maybe like a year later, murder his sister.
Yeah.
Do you want to walk through how this all comes together in the end? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Okay, yeah, you are, but I'm appreciating it because it is like clarifying some things. Hearing you say it is like, yeah, okay, that is what happened. But get this, dude, because if you were following my metaphor on this, then I think that dude, Coleman Domingo's character, as a young kid, was so messed up by seeing this guy get killed that he killed his sister. And he said that it was Candyman, and I think that's the recurring theme in this. In this whole thing is that people are like referring cycles of like trauma and violence are being like blamed on this external force thing. That's kind of what's going on. But what he attempts to do at the end of this movie is he brings Anthony into the church, into this creepy church that's there on Cabrini Green. And it's the church where he was baptized. He has got Anthony there. Anthony's arm has like completely rotted, and like the rot has like gone up half of his body, even onto his face almost at this point, making him look more like the rotted away like version of Candyman that you see in the first movie. Almost like he's on his way to like that, with like how he's got the exposed ribs and all this stuff. So like that's kind of weird. And then at this point, Coleman Domingo cuts off our friend Anthony's arm and jams a meat hook in there, which is one of the most horrifying things I've ever beheld. And then like binds it up and is like, he's going to be Candyman now. Don't you see? The cops are going to come in here and kill him. and then he's going to live forever and people are going to say his name. And that also ties into the first movie, because in the first movie they're like, die with me and you live forever in legend, in urban myth, you know. Right. And then she being Brianna, who Domingo has also kidnapped and is watching all of this. Yes, sorry. At this point, yes, Brianna has been brought back in. Although I also think she's strangely absent from, like, I don't know if this movie is always sure who the protagonist is. I was going to ask you who you thought the protagonist is, because I would be it's baffling to me. I think the end of this movie definitely says, like, the last 20 minutes, definitely Brianna. It feels like at the beginning that it's Yaya's movie who's playing Anthony, but then towards the end, it feels more like Brianna's movie. But at the end here, she is like, well, this is obviously horrible. So she like tries to run away. She ends up stabbing Coleman Domingo's character to death. Viciously. I mean, and that is like a moment that could take its whole own unpacking, like of like what is going on with her when she really goes in on him. You are right that she, I feel like, is the character least served by this 90-minute version of the movie we're watching. Yeah. Because, like, she has plot threads both in the past and in the present that are not paid off at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In ways that I feel like it really could be. Like, I think she's an interesting, compelling character and a great actress. Oh, yeah. So I feel like everything is there for that to have a better payoff than it does. Yeah. But anyway, she escapes. Coleman Domingo has called in the cops, has like phoned in the cops too at some point, so that this whole plan can go down the way he wants it to. And then it does. It goes down exactly, basically the way that he said it would. The cops do show up. They do kill Anthony, who is already pretty much dead and messed up at this point too. But they do kill him. They arrest Brianna. They have her in the car. There's this cop who's like doing the dirty cop routine where he's like telling her what story she's going to tell the court about what happened there, and like how the officer was like lunged at by Anthony, which is definitely not what happened. He's like lying in her arms, bleeding out already when he comes in. And then he's like, or you can be charged as like a co-conspirator, essentially. And in that moment, she's like, all right, I'll tell you anything you want me to, but just let me look at myself in the mirror real quick. And you're like, oh, hell yeah. And then she summons Candyman, and Anthony appears and kills all of these cops. Anthony as Candyman. Yeah. Anthony as Candyman, like, shows up with the bees, like, swarming around them. And, like, in a pretty hype sequence, like, kills all of these cops. Mm-hmm. And does not kill her, and she gets out, which is, again, like, the strange mythology of what's going on with who gets killed when you say Candyman's name. Right. Is she protected by Candyman because it's Anthony? Is she protected by Candyman because it's like a race thing where he's protecting her from like white evildoers? What's happening? It's unclear, but it's totally hype. And he kills all these dudes, and then he looks at her and he says, "Tell everyone," and then he cut to credits. He looks at her, and he becomes Tony Todd. He does from the original. Yeah. All the bees like fly away from his face, and it's Tony Todd. Yeah, it's that CGI de-aged Tony Todd to look like the first movie, and he says, "Tell everyone," and we cut to black. Again, I think they went for like metal ending that does not necessarily tie into whatever the rest of the movie was working with. Yes. Or not all the way. It like ties in kind of, but not all the way. Yeah, it's really interesting to me that both of these movies, despite having very different strengths and weaknesses, sort of like both fall in the same pitfalls of like not paying off things and having weird endings and having like very complicated, messy mythology that are totally different from each other. Yeah, also completely different and fairly contradictory, because it's also not ever does what's her name from the first movie show up as a Candyman. She is referenced in like the paper cutout history of Anthony, but she's not ever like implicated as a Candyman or as somebody who would be haunting them at all. So I've got a little bit about this. Okay. In the behind the scenes. Cool. So the only time that Virginia Madsen appears in this movie is that she has recorded new dialogue Oh, interesting.
As Helen from the original movie that Anthony listens to as he sort of listens to like this recording that she was making throughout the first movie. And that's the only time she appears in the whole movie. And the only time Tony Todd appears in the whole movie is as that like CGI de-aged.
At the very, very end.
Which I think is kind of a missed opportunity, specifically because they were advertising him that he was like back to play the Candyman.
Oh, huh.
And that to me is like if you had advertised Rogue One that like Carrie Fisher is back playing Princess Leia.
Right.
Because it is like the same amount of screen time. It is like 30 seconds of a CGI character.
Yeah, a weird CGI version of them.
That they have voiced. And also at the beginning, I wasn't sure if that was Tony Todd or not because I don't know what he looks like now as an old guy. And the other character is like an older Candyman. So I was like, is he playing a different character that they wrote so they could get around the fact that he wouldn't have aged? No, that's Michael Hargrove, I think is his name. It's just another actor playing another character.
The idea of bringing in another Candyman is so strange. Just like another one that's not part of the cycle. So then is Tony Todd the real Candyman? And that other guy...
He's the original. They say that.
He is the original. We know that. But, like, does that make him more real? Is he a second, like, another one? Or is it all, like, a continuum of Candymen? Do you know what I'm saying?
The end credits shed a little bit of light on this. The end credits are done entirely in this, like, puppet form that we've seen throughout the whole movie. But the end credits tell 5 stories. The first one is of the original Candyman. We see basically his life of being the painter and then getting the hands sewn off. The second one is like a kid on a bicycle who a lady like points at him and he gets the cops called on him. The third one is Sherman, who's the Candyman throughout this whole movie. The fourth one is Helen, and it's her story from the first movie. And the fifth one is Anthony, and it's his story from this movie that we've just watched.
Yeah.
And then it ends with the 5 of them all as Candymen standing together with like the hooks. I guess part of the reason for this is that they had the weird problem that both Candyman, as we knew him, Tony Todd, and Helen are dead. So they should look the same. So I guess maybe that is the problem, is just that like you would either need to hire a new actor or CGI them the whole time.
Yeah, because they wouldn't have aged at all.
If you were like being honest to that, I guess maybe that's why they did this. But this is what I've got on this. People were saying that the first draft of the screenplay, which had leaked out, I was trying to get my hands on it to read it for this and I couldn't, but that the Jordan Peele, Win Rosenfeld script, what like went a little bit more in on Helen as being sort of like an example of the gentrification that this movie is talking about. And that there was a sequence in that script where Anthony is taken to jail. And in jail, he summons the Helen Candyman, who then appears to him and like murders everyone in the police station for him to get out.
See, that honestly makes more sense and is pretty dope.
That was not in the place of anything. Like all of the Domingo stuff was still there of him ultimately being, all of the multiple Candyman stuff was still in that version of the script. Yeah. So I can see how it's like a little bit stuffed. Yeah. But that was there. Now, here's the interesting thing. I don't think that stuff ever got filmed. But in the first trailer for this movie, which was released February 27th, 2020, go back and watch this. There's like dialogue that is in the film, but everything else in this trailer is in the movie, right? Because this is all stuff that they filmed, you know? Yeah. 2 minutes and 6 seconds in, you see the church scene. That's the climax of this movie. And in it, there is a woman sitting in the back pew watching it. So there's like a shot of just her, and then there's a shot of like the scene from the back, and you see everyone else, and you also see this woman back there. And people are saying that that's supposed to be Helen. Now, it doesn't really look like Helen as we ever saw her. It does look like a woman who was burned alive. Okay. It looks like a charred corpse, like in a dress with Helen's hairstyle, sitting there and watching the events happening. So I don't know if that's supposed to be Helen or not, but we know that that was filmed and cut out of the version of the movie that was released.
Wow. That's interesting.
That's my behind the scenes. That's what I dug up on this. Well, should we flop or bop this movie?
Yeah, let's flop or bop it. Let's just do it. What do you think? Flop or bop?
Bop to this one as well as the first one. I will say I think I slightly prefer the first one, but not by a huge amount. Flop or bop for 2021?
Bop. Here's the thing. First movie from 1992 has a lot of ideas. I'm grading it on a curve because it is from 1992. And it has like things to say about race. And I'm not sure if it successfully says those things or if those are like intelligent things. But it is like trying to get in there and do something. And it's really interesting. And it is just compelling as a film in other interesting ways. And this one is also doing all of those things, but also I feel like fails to come together. And it's just like you've had more time to think about it.
I kind of feel like the first one has more things to say and more provocative things to say about race specifically. This one obviously has like the art lens, which was maybe some of the most interesting stuff of the movie to me.
And like it brings up, but never like does anything with the idea of them being artists who gentrify. Like the discussion of like, do artists contribute to gentrification, or is that question completely beside the point because it's the city that gentrifies? But the answer of this movie is to literally stand up and walk out of the room when that question is brought up and turn it back into a slasher. Like as soon as like the idea gets brought up, it's like, well, okay, but we're not going to have that conversation.
That was some of the most interesting stuff to me. This idea that like the city asks artists to move into places when they're gentrifying them because like there's very low rent and artists are normally poor. But then once artists live there, it's cool.
Yeah.
And other people live there and they have like contributed to the thing.
Yeah.
Which is certainly something that I can relate to in my life. I mean, certainly.
We've certainly profited off of that ourselves.
We have certainly lived in like poor areas where we saw the rent go up while we lived there, you know?
Yeah. Although we certainly didn't make it cooler by us being there.
No, and we also unfortunately had day jobs. Which is the slight they give against artists in this movie.
Well, I sometimes had a day job.
Well, this is the other thing is that like there's this interesting angle that all of the main characters in this movie are like seemingly well off. Like very upper class, which I guess is similar to the first movie.
Well,
but our characters are like a museum curator, an artist, and a real estate broker.
But I think that he is like living off of her, and that's like a tension that we don't see it. But then on the other hand, she like moves out of the apartment.
Yeah.
And so is it their oh, they do say it's their apartment.
Their new apartment. They just moved in together.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there's an interesting directorial thing that Nia is doing. It's clear that like a conscious decision that Nia DaCosta made directing this script is to never show on screen any violence done against Black people. Because the events of the first movie, which involve violence being done to Black people, and the story of the Candyman we hear are both shown in shadow puppets. The Black characters who are killed in this film, Anthony and Coleman Domingo, are killed off screen. Like the camera is basically just above where they are. And all of the killing, like the slasher movie stuff, is all white victims. So I think that's really cool and interesting. Also, the Black character that we see Candyman kill is the boy's sister, who is killed off screen.
Yeah.
I think that's cool and interesting, but I wonder if that is the reason why it feels like the main characters are not involved with the action in this movie, unlike the first movie.
Yeah. I kept expecting her brother to die or someone else close and important to them to die, because like that's the thing that I think really sells it in the first movie is when Bernadette dies, like less than halfway through the movie, you're like and can happen because we liked her. She seemed like a solid, good, like main character. And now she is just dead.
And her brother, her brother and his boyfriend, who are big parts of this movie, are just like absent for the last third of this movie. Yeah. Never come into the plot whatsoever.
Yeah.
And Brianna, too, it feels like is sort of sidelined for a little bit until she comes back in. It feels like all of the slasher sequences are sort of like separate from the movie.
Yeah, I was very much wondering what the high school girls had to do with any of it.
Seemingly nothing.
Like nothing at all other than that girl had been to the art show.
Feels like filler in a movie that is already the bare minimum a movie could be.
Yeah.
Lengthwise.
Yeah.
I think this is scarier than the first one.
Joe, a lot scarier.
But I do think that I was expecting it to be a little scarier. Like, I think compared to Get Out and Us, this to me was like not even close.
Do you think that had something to do with like kind of being spoiled on it?
No, I don't think so. Because I think the moments that I felt were actually scary in this did work.
Yeah.
Even in the slasher sequences, a lot of the killing happens off screen
Mm-hmm.
or like weirdly in mirrors and stuff. And it's like interesting visually, but I definitely think the packed house that I saw this with was also expecting something a little bit scarier.
Interesting.
Because they like really came to life in those killing sequences.
Yeah.
Which are pretty few and far between. And I think that they were definitely expecting more of a movie where you are sort of like scared the whole time.
Yeah.
Instead of like a drama rumination that has like 3 or 4 slasher sequences placed throughout it. Happening to people who aren't really characters.
Yeah. Who do you think the MVP of this film was?
That's tough.
We're taking Brianna and Anthony off the table.
Okay.
As our 2 potential protagonists.
That makes it a little bit easier then. Then I would give it, as I would in the first movie, to Vanessa Williams as Anna Marie McCoy.
Yeah.
Who like absolutely kills her scene. And I wish that she had more. I really wish they would have used her more because I think that she's so good in it. I will say during that scene, I was really scared that they were going to kill her. And I was like, if she dies, like I would not be on board with this movie anymore.
Yeah.
I think she's awesome. And I was like, this woman gives 2 incredible performances 30 years apart. What else has she been doing? And I looked it up and she's been a series regular on Days of Our Lives since 2016.
Wow.
Like this incredible actress doing daytime soap operas.
She probably kills it on that.
She's probably amazing and has so much money, but I would be like, Hollywood, what are you doing? Why is this actress not in everything?
Yeah, for real.
She looks amazing and she's very good at playing all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Why is she not in more stuff?
Put her in more things.
Yeah, she would be mine. Who would your MVP be?
I'm going to have to go with Coleman Domingo.
Mm.
Truly, like, unhinged at the end. But from, like, a slow burn of, like, nice, relatable guy all the way through, like, weird conspiracy guy to absolutely crazy is going to kill you guy. And, like, all of the twists and turns in between.
Mm-hmm.
In, like, a really cool way.
I don't know if you cut this, but at the laundromat, he's reading a book by Clive Barker.
I did. I didn't catch what book it was, but I did see Clive Barker on there.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice touch.
Mm-hmm. He's really good. I'd give a shout out to the brother too.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say he is
a lot of fun. And I thought the whole movie that the brother's boyfriend, was being played by Lil Dicky, and it wasn't, but. I was just like, did they cast Little Dicky and then like kind of make him look like Jack Harlow? But no is the answer to that.
All right. Well, would that count as your final thought on this film?
Okay.
What else do we need to dig into about it?
Can we just kind of walk through the end? Like,
okay.
What did you think about the reveal of Domingo and his like plan in this church?
It doesn't make sense. I don't.
Can we back up? What is happening to Anthony? Like, what is this thing that Anthony is bitten by a bee and is like slowly becoming the Candyman?
He's becoming the Candyman. I think he's doing it. Like, I think he's killing people straight up. I think he hears this legend. I think he kills the art critic. The whole thing is just a downward spiral into madness. I think the bee sting is messed up. I don't know what's going on with that. And I thought that maybe at some point he would like have bees crawl out of him. And there was a part where there was like a swarm of them.
Because the wound looks like honeycombs.
Yeah.
In like a really disturbing way.
Yeah, it looks like they could like come in and out of him. But we never quite see it, so I don't know if it really pays off. But then, okay, so what is the plan? Because he's already becoming Candyman. That's the thing. It's like Coleman Domingo didn't have to do anything He's already like becoming possessed by the thing just from like hearing the story and having been the kid and having gotten stung by the bee.
That's seemingly unrelated.
Is this all because Anthony was the baby that Candyman took in the first one and like has been like blessed, cursed by him to be the new one, anointed?
Yeah.
He's the anointed one.
If that was made clear a little bit more, that would be cool.
You mean like if there's a moment where Coleman Domingo looked at him and said, "You are the anointed one"?
Or if his mom told him that, and then we flash back to the never explained moment in the first one where Candyman takes him and says, "Now it's time for another miracle."
Now it's time for, exactly. Like that's what I'm thinking. But I think these movies are for research-minded folks. It's like these movies appeal to people who want to break out the little red string and the push pins and like tie it all, like figure it all out. So I think they're just dropping abstract clues to mess with people at this point.
I think that the twist with Domingo would make more sense if we didn't find out that he knows Candyman is real. Like, I think his whole thing would make a lot more sense if he was just a guy who was like, we need another urban legend to deal with the fact that so much drama is happening. The black people keep getting killed by police. And to do that, I'm going to dress this guy up as Candyman, have him killed by the police.
Right. And then that's going to be the new urban legend.
Yeah, the community will feed on that.
That would you're right. It would make more sense if he didn't know for real that Candyman existed.
And saw the real Candyman kill his sister. Like, that's so weird.
But it's also not clear if, like, him becoming the real Candyman is something that Coleman Domingo is aware of and or wants.
I don't think that Coleman Domingo is aware of that.
You don't?
No.
But why did he cut the dude's arm off?
I also saw people on Reddit saying that they thought maybe nobody but Anthony could see the thing happening on his hand and arm.
Oh, that would make more sense.
But that's never revealed, if so.
That is never revealed. That would make sense, though.
Like, another idea I love is the mom talking about how the whole community swore to, like, kill it by never talking about it again.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is this, like, really powerful idea of, like, this is part of the section where I'm like, is this a movie about storytelling? Where I was like, you need to tell people about the past in order to make sure it doesn't repeat itself.
Right.
And this whole, I feel like that's a big conversation in education right now, is like, how much should we be talking about the horrific things that have happened in the past? But this, to me, it seems like they're setting up a thing where, like, because all the old people in the community were like, we'll never explain what happened, we'll never say that Candyman was bad, then it just, like, all repeated itself. And they failed, That
is also a beautiful explication of the idea, but yeah, it never quite hangs together. But all of it is potential in this movie, so watch it. It's good. It'll make you think about these things for sure.
So Domingo then gets killed by Brianna, and then there's all this stuff with the cops.
Where they kill Anthony.
Seems a little surface level to me.
Yes, to bring in that level of horrific imagery that's potent in the American psyche right now.
Yeah. It seems a little mustache twirling. Like, specifically the way that the cops behave in terms of, like, rushing in and, like, and I'm not saying this wouldn't happen. And anyone who is a regular listener to the show knows that we have no love for police officers. But, like, that this man is, like, basically dead on the ground, and then, like, these dudes just run in and immediately, like, shoot him 3 times. I thought at first that they had shot Brianna. That
is also what I thought, which would have made more sense and been more horrible.
That would have been a worse ending that worked better, I would say.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then with the car, I don't know, that stuff just didn't totally work for me. It worked for me at the beginning when you're seeing the flashback of the little kid and all of them swarming. That for me totally worked and made me tear up a little bit. And I have definitely, like, seen that just this past year alone. I've seen, like, 50 cop cars at a place, or, like, all of that. And that's what you see in that first scene. And I think that's, like, that all felt real to me. And that sense of dread that, like, whenever there are, 30 or 50 police officers in one area, that, like, it is only going to lead to someone who is not a police officer being killed.
Yeah.
So that worked. But yeah, at the end, like, and the very mustache twirling conversation the cop has with Brianna in the car. But then I do like the moment after that. I was kind of like, I don't like it. And then when he comes out, like...
But it's like you kind of have to play them like Nazis so that it's hype when he kills them. You know, like that's kind of part of it too. It's like...
I think it is still potent and still like a little bit shocking to watch like a heroic cop massacre.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that we have really seen much like that on screen before. So yeah, I do kind of see your point there. But I like in that moment that it almost becomes like about their relationship again.
Mm-hmm.
Which ties it back to the first one, because the first one is really like about the relationship between the Candyman and Helen.
Yeah.
And it like ends with this like relationship between Anthony and Brianna that he is like still protecting her beyond the grave. And then it like finally ties back to the first one with you seeing Tony Todd. But I don't know. I just feel like this is a movie with 50 big ideas that maybe doesn't have time for all of them.
Well, it's also only 91 minutes too, so it's hard to have time for all those ideas.
Yeah, for sure. What would your ranking be of this among the other Peels?
Ooh, I think if it's writing exclusively, I think it goes Get Out, Us, Keanu, this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when I ranked him earlier, I put Us as my number one.
Yeah.
Because I like that movie the best. But I think like writing wise, I think that Get Out is the tightest.
Yeah. I think like as a whole movie, I would go Us, Get Out, Keanu, this.
Mm-hmm.
I would put this at the bottom too.
Yeah.
Keanu is really good.
Keanu is really good.
Keanu also has big things to say.
Keanu has big things to say, and I think Keanu pulls it all off. I think it like follows through on pretty much all of the ideas that it sets up, and I value that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Any final thoughts?
I just enjoyed watching these two movies.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot going on in both of them. I don't think that they managed to elevate the material with the new one, which maybe is a little bit of a disappointment. But after the first one, I was like really excited to see the new one because I was like, there are so many directions you could take this. Like, there isn't a clear sequel setup in the first one.
Yeah.
Unless it's just like Helen is the Candyman. But to do that, you would have had to make it in 1993.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, but I feel like they, along the way, like fell prey to a lot of the same problems that the first one has. But I still think it is like cool. I think it's really interesting. I like the art angle, which we didn't spend a ton of time talking about, but like that stuff is really interesting. I wish it paid off a little more, but I also wish the academia stuff paid off a little more in the first one, you know? Like, it's just sort of like tossing ideas out there. I feel like a lot of times people complain about like social elements being thrown into like legacy sequels or new versions emphasizing things that old versions didn't. But this like totally makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Because the first one is like so provocative about race.
Yeah.
In like the trappings of a slasher movie. When you watch that first one, you're like, yeah, I get why Jordan Peele would want to
remake this. Yeah.
Yeah. What would your final thoughts on these two be?
I agree. They're thrilling movies. To watch the original for the first time was wonderful. And then to watch this so close on the heels was really cool too. I don't think I'd ever like been introduced to a series, watch the first and then watch the legacy sequel, like all that close together at once. So pretty sweet. I would definitely recommend. Wade, now is the moment for me to tell the listener that Bumtober is coming. Send your series suggestions to cinemabumspod@gmail.com or DM us at cinemabums on the Instagram. There's a little segment here called the Dune Book Report. Where are we at?
Yeah. Hey, if you're listening to this for the first time because you saw Candyman, we're in the middle of watching every Denis Villeneuve movie. To Dune coming out in October. So join us in that because it's been very fun and like equally thrilling to this movie.
Absolutely.
I've made a little progress, but not much.
Is he in the desert yet?
They have made it to Arrakis.
Okay, that's cool. Well, keep plugging.
Yeah.
So up next week, we have Prisoners.
Yes.
2013.
Denis' English language debut.
His English language debut that's coming out. The next time we will be talking about the work of Mr. Jordan Peele is in 47 weeks when Nope comes out in theaters.
Yeah. And we should just say briefly here at the end that this is our 50th episode.
Oh, whoa! Well, good
happy
for us.
50 episodes, Emmett. Feels wild.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
Dude. Well, does that mean it's been a year?
We're coming up on
Or
a year.
52 would be.
Well, I guess we did the Oscar watches and the finales and stuff. We sometimes do 2 a
So
week.
we do. Oh, we ended up doing more. Gotcha.
I think November is a year. I'm not sure the exact date.
Yeah. Well, that's crazy.
We are rapidly approaching.
Well,
Congrats to you.
Sweet. Everybody, much love. Stay
Yes.
safe out there.
Love you
And
guys.
stay frosted. Cinema Bums is a production of DKG Podcast. It is created and produced by Wade Lawrence Holloman and me, Emmett Temple. Wade also edits and mixes this podcast. Our theme music is by Zane Holloman, who you can find on Bandcamp, and our show art is by Autumn Beckner. Our social media is managed by Laura Bennett. If you like what you hear, please tell all your friends and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, the 2 best ways to spread the word about our work. You can also follow us on Instagram at CinemaBums or email us at cinemabumspod@gmail.com. Don't flake on us. We'll be back next week.